There was another article that came out for right here. This is NATO troops arrive in Odessa to occupy Moldova. Now, this gets, and maybe I should ask it this way: why is Moldova so important to the European Union, where they're willing to go this far above their skis to effectively cheat? I know Transnistria, for example, preventing Transnistria from voting is another thing.
Yeah.
Giving Russia 2 polling locations, which is just amazing, right, for the size of Russia, and giving Europe hundreds. Like, why was this election so important from their point of view? Because they were talking about, literally, if the election went a different way, sending NATO troops to occupy Moldova because they thought it was going to, quote, go to the Russians.
Yeah. Okay. So real quick, first, just a narrative thing that's going on before I forget it, because I know I will.
Okay.
There have been several comments in the last week, narrative from both sides, right? This has come from Lavrov, right, who said that we are at war with NATO, right? He said it. Peskov said the same thing. We're at war. What do you want? Donald Tusk said it, right? The Polish leader. We are at war. We cannot lose this conflict, right? So that sets the stage. Both sides, leaders, of some at least countries within NATO, right? We've heard it from numerous other officials before, of course, and Russia, at the very highest, or next to the very highest level, are saying that we're at war. Okay, so Moldova is a small country that was once a part of the Soviet Union, wedged between Ukraine and Romania, right, on the Black Sea. It is historically, ethnically, and politically divided country between a history of Romania, being associated with Romania, and a history of being associated with the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. Elections, Moldova is a very poor, corrupt country. In the early 90s, as the Soviet Union self-dissolved, there was civil conflict in Moldova, as there were in several parts of the former Soviet Union. It's basically over nationalist and identity issues that resulted in a separatist region in Transnistria being formed on the border, on the far eastern border of Moldova, wedged up against Ukraine, which, of course, at the time was not, then a Banderite enemy of Russia. And it was resolved eventually with a certain number of Russian peacekeepers being put in Moldova by UN Security Council resolution agreement, and they remain there to this day. Although they're usually, attacked, as Russian occupation by the West that wants to prove them being put there. There's some 1,200 Russian troops there to this day that are essentially, at the moment, since the conflict in Ukraine, Russia cannot easily reinforce them, resupply them, anything, right? Basically, they have to be smuggled in and out through the Moldovan capital, essentially, and that's the same way they receive supplies. If Russia were, if Transnistria were now to be attacked by the Kiev regime, by NATO forces, by Moldova's regular military, Russia would have a nearly impossible task of defending those peacekeepers. They would probably have to surrender, to be perfectly honest, because Russia would have to, I don't know, it's also landlocked, right? They would have to do a airlift over Kiev regime controlled territory in Ukraine, where they would certain to have some air defense or aircraft lying in ambush and that sort of thing. And then, you would, even if you got troops in, you would have to keep them resupplied. It's an impossible defensive position there. So along with Ukraine, Moldova, as well as Georgia, were these three next tier countries that were being pushed by the West for inclusion in both NATO and the EU, right? That they were the next targeted countries, right?
Mhm.
Ukraine, right, was the big prize, but also Moldova and Georgia. And Moldova, over the last few years, they have very divided politics. Every election is on a knife edge between ultimately, I mean, there are of course domestic issues and left-right issue, left liberal issues. It's not really left-right, left liberal issues, old school left liberal issues. Domestically issues of, a large part of the Moldovan population speak Romanian and identify as Romanian essentially, and a lot of them would like to actually join Romania. And there are others, particularly minority groups, prominent minority groups in Moldova, not only in Transnistria, that still look to Russia. And when you add up, it's essentially a kind of a 45-45 split, with the last 10% swinging, in every election. And in the last several years, they've had a furiously pro-Western leader, Maya Sandu, as president, whom is pushing them to the brink of joining the West and the Kiev regime in the conflict with Russia and Ukraine. Right? I mean, her rhetoric. She's been targeting any not pro-Western. I mean, you could say pro-Russian, but usually it's just not rabidly anti-Russian, as is always the case. But anyone who questions a pro-NATO, pro-EU orientation is, targeted with, shall we say, politicized legal weapons, right? Because that's what it is. They're going after. They're saying this. Essentially, what they're saying is, this isn't a geopolitically unacceptable political opinion, and we will lock you up, ban you from running, get anything we can on any possible excuse we can generate to keep you from having that position.
Mm-hmm.
Now, over the weekend, Moldova had very, again, knife's edge parliamentary elections. And Maya Sandu was, even in the hours of this weekend, still banning socialist and pro-Russian opposition parties, right? Two of them, just going in the hours, right, before the election. And they pull out all the administrative stops to try to make sure the vote, and the vote was razor edge. And yeah, do we really know the results of the election? All right, so most of the people in Transnistria, which still have the right to vote in elections, were prevented from voting. Right, there's some 400,000 people there, some 200,000 voters, and only a few thousand of them, because they made them cross the bridge into Moldova, the bridges into Moldova to cross the Dnistry River there, and most of the bridges were closed down, right? The construction work on election day to prevent them from going over. So out of the 200,000 votes, only a few thousand were able to be cast, right? Yeah. And on top of that, Moldova has a big diaspora. Why? Because Moldova has a shit economy. And a lot of people go out of the country to work, right? The largest portion of those to Russia, right? And also large numbers of them to Europe. And everything was done like laying out the red carpet, busing them into the voting centers, right? To the embassy, wherever voting centers were set up in Europe, right? Yep. In Romania, in Italy, in Germany, in the UK, wherever they were, dozens and dozens of voting centers. And then in Russia, which has some 200 or 300,000 Moldovans, right? Residents. There were 2 voting stations, and they were only given a few thousand ballots for those several 100,000 people, and only 4,000 votes from the diaspora within Russia were able to vote. By the way, Ukraine has done the same thing, except they just forbid Ukrainians in Russia from voting over the last quote unquote elections in Ukraine. This is all perfectly fine with the West, because Russia, right? I mean, that's everything, if you're a pro-Russian party, it's okay to ban you because Russia, right? I mean, that's the way their democracy works, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, the opposition, no matter what, whichever way the official count, quote unquote, of this election went, the other side was not going to respect the results. And indeed, the main opposition party leader, Dodon, whom is old school lefty, right? With some modern, shall we say, pragmatic elements. He's a political beast of his own. He has already announced that he won't respect these results because what the results showed was if you take the vote within Moldova, the opposition won. If you add in the abroad vote with all these basically ballot stuffing going on in European countries and the diaspora in Russia prevented from voting, right, by every administrative means, then that gets close enough to overturn the results and put the election into like 0.2% in the Maya Sandu pro-Western camp. And they're already, of course, proclaiming victory. The opposition is not accepting these results. Of course, the West is already proclaiming that, that it was a decisive vote in favor of the Western orientation. Okay, I mean, certainly not of the people actually living in Moldova.
Yeah.
But that's what we heard from the EU high foreign policy muckety muck Kaja Kallas and other European leaders already. But lots of things happening in the meantime. We have these reports that British and French troops are in Ukraine on the ground in Odessa, ready to move into Transnistria, right? Not just Moldova, but where the separatist part of Moldova, where the Russian peacekeepers are. We have Russia. We have the Kiev regime. First, the Kiev regime in Ukraine passed a bill last week allowing them to put their troops in foreign countries, meaning in this particular situation, the immediate context is Moldova, right? To put troops into Moldova. Very easy for them. They're right there. Yes, and a buildup of troops. Also, among Russia's strikes this weekend, particularly on Saturday, Russia was pounding the trains and electrical infrastructure in that border there, Transcarpathia, which is way far from the contact lines, like not a normal strike element at all. Obviously, with the intent to stop a rapid transfer of troops into Moldova, meaning that they I don't think they would do that unless they had a real fear that the Kiev regime was about to send troops into Moldova or even, Transnistria, part of Moldova. So lots of explosive things already happening on the ground. And, protests are happening right now in Chisinau, in the Moldovan capital, of course. And there will be, of course, an attempt to drive those protesters out. They will attempt to not recognize the new parliamentary government. I mean, it's an explosive situation. And I have said since early 2022 that I did not see this conflict ending without Moldova being drawn into it, because it's being pushed on the same page as Ukraine. It's being dragged into NATO and the EU, and you have this Maya Sandu who is all too willing to throw her country. Georgia now has leaders that said, no, we will not be, we have our own issues with Russia, but we will not be your Ukraine. We will not open a second front against Russia. We are not going to be suicide for your geopolitical interests. We'll work out our own differences with the Russians, right? But Maya Sandu in Moldova is clearly on the other side. She is willing to toss her country into war to be part of the geopolitical West, to be part of the cool club, to sit with the cool clubs, the cool kids in the cafeteria, right? That's where she is, despite the fact that, obviously, I mean, you could quibble 0.2% either way, but at least half the country is fiercely against. And it's an explosive situation. It is a
well. That's what I was going to say. Is Russia willing to go to war over Transnistria?
They have not been up until now. I mean, they've done everything possible to avoid it. They've played very low key with Transnistria over recent years. There have been energy crisis before in Moldova and Ukraine, with the gas being supplied to Moldova being shut down by Ukraine, and then arrangements being made, but then shutting down the power to Transnistria. But then again, Transnistria also has a hydroelectric power plant there that is actually important in Moldova, and really shady behind backdoor arrangements were made between Russia and Moldova to keep the power onto Moldova proper and Transnistria respectively. We don't know the details of those things. Nothing has ever been released. Neither side wants to talk about it, but that obviously took place, right, in the last year. But things have come to a head again, and it's of course being pushed by Ukraine, by Maya Sandu, by those figures within European NATO that want war with Russia. This is a perfect opportunity to expand the conflict horizontally into Moldova. And even though Moldova is not part of NATO in the EU, there's already NATO troops on the ground in Moldova. The French troops have been there for a long period of time. American forces have been right there in Romania as well. It's a powder keg, right? And it's like Ukraine, right? At this point, as far as NATO, as far as the collective West is concerned, they have marked Moldova just like Ukraine, right? Like a dog, marking its territory. They have marked that, saying this is ours now, and there will be no retreat from it. They're already waging that geopolitical fight in Ukraine, right? Which they say they're in a war and they can't lose it, again and again. And Moldova is just this small little extra bit, on the side of this conflict that has been kind of brewing this entire time. And ultimately, for those people who want to expand this to include NATO, that will be the perfect opportunity to do so by expanding it horizontally first into Moldova. And chances are then that will create such an outrage. Russia attempting to reform the Soviet Union, blah blah blah. That will provide the spark for the direct NATO-Russia conflict that so many people so many leaders within the West clearly want.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It seems that all of this false flag stuff is aimed at that already, or creating a narrative for it already. I mean, sure. Drones in Denmark, drones in Sweden. We believe that the
new line out of Zelensky, and I've heard some Europeans, is that they're being flown from the Russian shadow fleet, i.e. the international maritime tankers without insurance in London that don't care about Western sanctions and continue to do business transporting Russian oil anyway, right? Most of them are not even Russian-owned, Russian flag of convenience or anything like that. It's just the global maritime shipping industry, right? We had a report out last week that, according to the West, some 17% of the world's oil shipping fleet is now, quote unquote, part of Russia's shadow fleet, i.e. conducting business with Russia still.
Right.
Now they're claiming that these ships, again, most of which are not actually Russian ships, they're just bringing oil in and out of Russia for the money, is where the drones that have been buzzing over Denmark and doing nothing, apparently, are being done. Again, a clear provocation and false flag. And not only are they attempting to say it's Russian drones, but they're also then trying to choke off Russian oil traffic through the Baltic Sea, saying that, that the drones are off these ships, giving the European countries another excuse to try to intercept Russian or often international ships carrying Russian oil in the narrow lane of international waters in the Baltic Sea, claiming some type of first it was going to be an insurance pretext, and they backed off of that, and now it will be a BS security pretext because they could be carrying Russian drones, right? That is the excuse. And again, it is another attempt to start a direct NATO-Russia war, because if you start intercepting Russian shipping in the Baltic Sea, they've already sent convoys, sent ships with naval convoys. They've already sent jets out to stop the attempted boarding of one ship. It is an act of war, right, to stop another country's ships in international waters. Now, it has to be said that it is a act of war that the U.S. regularly commits against North Korea and Iran and Venezuela and other countries, but never before with Russia, of course, being a nuclear, at least a nuclear superpower, and now clearly a conventional superpower by some measures as well. But again, it is another spark, another pouring gasoline out by those who want war between NATO, meaning also the U.S. with Russia. And there's a lot of people in Europe, a lot of leaders in Europe, the Baltics, Poland, the Scandinavian countries, the UK that are, and now Germany with merits, are Poland are extremely hot for it.
So what's the thought that the U.S. is going to save them in this? Like, meaning, because I have two thoughts. One is that the belief is, well, the Ukrainian military is in a bad shape, regardless of whether they would admit it. They know it. They get the military information and what's forth. And in their minds, we need to intervene before Ukraine collapses.
And they're doing this now while Russia is still fighting in the Donbass, not when Russia is moving on Kharkov or Kiev or Odessa, which is something that I've always said that pressure will increase, right? But we're already at this point, and Russia is just at the point of taking Pokrovsk and Seversk and Kupiansk at this point, right? Still within the Donbass or southern Kharkov. So this is, I mean, it's just kind of an inevitable end. This was never going to, the West made clear they could not lose this conflict. And they tried to end it on their terms diplomatically with bluff and bluster and sticks and some paltry attempts at carrots and with Trump, but that has not worked. So now they're back to the provocation and the escalation.
So is it fair to say that both sides assume there's a World War III, and both sides are effectively maneuvering, in one side creating justification to getting involved in Ukraine?
Both sides consider it, if not inevitable, then very likely.
What's the difference? Well, and the reason I'm asking what's the difference, if all of your plans are geared around a third world war, then you're kind of assuming that there's going to be a third world war. Like, for example, Russia. I would wager that, as you pointed out, Russia's saving missiles. Okay, why are they saving missiles? They're saving missiles for a larger conflict later on. Russia is taking its time, and it's going to slow inexorable push with this idea of damaging Europe before the war actually starts. Europe is taking its time to try to create a pretext to justify either getting daddy's attention or to justify getting involved in Ukraine before the Ukrainian military collapses. Meaning, and I guess it's rational in an irrational way. If you don't care about nuclear war, you don't.
So what's the difference? Yeah. The difference is between someone intent on suicide and driving their car straight off a cliff into the sea, and 2 people driving their cars at high speed, playing chicken towards that same cliff, hoping that the other person will divert course first. That's the difference.
Both cars are going off that cliff.
Yep.
Yeah, both cars are going off that cliff. What is their thinking from your point of view? Do they think that Daddy will save them ultimately?
Yes, of course they do. Of course they do.
So they fully believe in their minds Donald Trump will not let us get into a war without necessarily adding the United States support to that war, meaning sending in troops and everything
Donald Trump,
else.
who cares? What does Donald Trump mean? Donald Trump doesn't run big foreign policy decisions in the United States.
Well,
he doesn't.
Let's say the U.S. government sending U.S. troops.
U.S. government. Yes, they believe that the U.S. government, meaning the deep state, the institutions of power, if a direct war with Russia starts, right, where Russia is hitting targets, logistics, military bases within European territory, or shooting down European planes or whatever, wherever they are, then yes, they believe that the United States, they will invoke Article 5 of the NATO Charter, and they believe that the U.S. will then come to their aid, militarily, maybe initially with the hopes of keeping it to a conventional conflict, which is, a fool's game, because somebody will start to lose very quickly, which they will regard as unacceptable. They believe it, and I believe it. I believe the U.S. will do that. They have to. They can't. Whether Trump is particularly disposed towards it or not, he's not going to be given that choice. Right? Policy options will be presented him. Things will be. Yeah. Trump can't keep one position constant on anything for more than 15 minutes, or maybe a week, right? He's shifts, he's pulled left and right. Last week again, he was, Ukraine can win this thing, and we'll provide all of our weapons. They'll just be laundered through Europe, through NATO, and no policy changes, not more, but obviously at least a rhetorical political shift, completely different from the week before. And then he called Russia a paper tiger, and then 2 days later said, I would not call them a paper tiger, right? Just like he once said that Zelensky was a dictator, and even I was like, whoa. I mean, he almost had me at that point. I'm like, you can't just take that back. When he admits Zelensky, you can't. Then that 2 days later, he takes it back and he says, I never said that. It doesn't sound like something I'd say. So obviously the man doesn't hold any firm positions on anything. And there's so much pressure that would be applied to him. It is inconceivable, right? In the full Princess Bride sense of the word, inconceivable that Trump would not be, driven to that position, whatever he may feel or not.
So just to be clear, you accept that Trump is going to make this decision. You just are making the point of saying the level of pressure and screaming from Europe and from the U.S. intelligence, from depending on all these people, he is not going to be able to withstand that level of weight.
He's not now. He regularly is not able to withstand that pressure now. Certainly in a potential World War III situation with Russia, NATO Article 5 being invoked, no, he would not be able to. Even if he was disposed towards it. Doesn't make any sense.
But the other pressure also is you're about to end the world. That's the other bill. Like, go back to Khrushchev and Kennedy, for example. Kennedy, at the very least, didn't necessarily want to end the world. All of his generals did. And in their minds, well, you can just take part of, they'll get the East Coast, but we can destroy all of Russia. But if you remember,
there are people who think that in the United States today.
Yes, but the letter
that's regularly written about. We can win a nuclear war against Russia. It is written about.
But when it came down to it, the letter that was sent between both administrations was, in one case, panicky. And then you had the hardliners effectively basically saying, ignore the first letter that you received that came across as panicky, because they knew the world was about to end. You don't think that's going to factor into anybody's calculus? And
I think John F. Kennedy was competent, was relatively intelligent. and was later killed for what he did anyway. I don't think Donald Trump is any of those things, and they've tried to kill somebody. Tried to kill him already. Right?
Yeah, neither do I.
So
I agree with you.
Yeah, I don't have a John F. Kennedy hope in this particular Cuban Missile Crisis squared.
Just to be clear, I'm not claiming that Trump's Kennedy. I'm trying to, I guess, bring into the other counterweight to that. Yes, everybody's screaming at Donald Trump. You got to go and help your allies. You got to go help Europe. Oh my God, they're killing Europeans, et cetera, et cetera. They're getting eaten alive in a Russian blender. But then the other side of that is you're about to end the world. Just be aware. You're about to end the world. Billions of people.
The Russians will blink. They always blink. Putin's more rational and he's afraid. They're really weak. They'll back down. They always back down. That's what they say.
Putin back down. If that was true. If that's true.
That is
this is where we are, right? Where their thought is, well, we've been provocative.
That's an armchair quarterback call. And it is. We don't have intelligence, right? They have intelligence reports. They know their limitations. They know the powers of the enemy. They know what's going on the ground to a level that we will never know. I have presented myself the argument that this is only encouraging them, that it is being read as weakness in the West, and that eventually that will lead to problems. And I have also presented the other side of the argument that Russia says we're winning. We will not be provoked out of the box where we're winning into an escalated situation where things might be up in the air.
Yeah, that's a difficult box to deal with.
That one is at a state existence level that is above my pay grade to judge.
No, I agree. It's just, if the argument is, well, Russia is weak because Russia doesn't respond in the way that is provocative or quote unquote
the way that the West would.
Right. Yeah, and then it's like, and then you get into this kind of nuclear trade-off because one side continuously pushed the envelope, not recognizing, they were being pragmatic.
Continually refuses to accept that they're losing. Yes.
Oh, that sucks. One last question. Have you heard about a $90 billion deal? I've seen where Zelensky asked, and I've seen where he said these are the weapon systems that they wanted. I haven't seen confirmation that was agreed upon.
No, I haven't heard any. I haven't heard any confirmation. I've heard $1 billion of arms a month, but there's no agreement because again, this is money that the Europeans would have to pay, and that certainly has not been agreed to. We would have heard about that. I've heard of an initial $500 million of money that was paid in the first such use of a program that is supposed to be transfer weapons to Ukraine. But there's no details, right? Is this production? Is this stuff that's sitting on shelves? There was no details about it whatsoever. So,
okay. So
I don't even know if that's real or at least final yet at this point. But any $90 billion or $900 trillion deal, it's all talk at this point.
Mark, you are great. Great breakdown as always. Thank you for this. Honestly, I deeply appreciate it. Mark Sleboda, international relations security analyst, best in the business. Mark, I'm going to I'm going to get a T-shirt with best in the business on it.
Can you put that on my gravestone?
No, I would rather no. People should get their flowers before they drop dead. I am a firm believer in that. But you can find Mark on Boosty at Realpolitik, Mark Sleboda. You can find him. You can also just put in Mark Sleboda. You can find him on that. You can find him on Twitter at Mark Sleboda1. Mark, you're fantastic. Thank you for this. Deeply appreciate it. And you enjoy the rest of your day, okay?
You as well.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, people should get their flowers while they're alive. What's the point when they're